Hey guys, BuildZoid here, and normally I wouldn't want to do this, but the ending of this video from LTT made me very angry. Because, well, let's just watch it and then I'll make my complaints. Hopefully the audio levels are balanced. I don't normally play other people's media into my videos, so I don't know how this is going to work out. There are subtitles though.
That doesn't mean that what we're dealing with now is okay. So what do? Are all 5090s just as dangerous? Well, as it turns out, the answer is no. We reached out to both MSI and ASUS, NVIDIA board partners, and MSI assured us that NVIDIA is the only one.
Yeah, and this is a straight up lie. Like, this is either the person that they got in touch with doesn't know, which is entirely possible because probably this is like a PR or marketing person, and PR and marketing people don't need to know how GPUs work in order to work in PR and marketing. So, you know, that's like best case scenario, or they do know how the GPUs work and they're just straight up lying, which is significantly worse, but also totally be totally unsurprising to me. But anyway, so this is just wrong. Straight up. Like, this is completely wrong. And the thing that infuriates me about this is that, like, LTT has resources that I could only dream of. They could literally just go buy a 5090 from a scalper and then get one of their engineers to measure how the connector is actually wired on the card. And they would find out that what MSI just told them is a lie. And then, of course, they get the ASUS.
The 6 pins and 6 pins down to just 2 contact points on the board. ASUS then went as far as to assure us that their implementation allows per-pin monitoring, and even went as far as to create an in-game overlay to show that everything is working fine. As for what to do if you already bought a Founders Edition...
So, now ASUS is not lying, but what they're referring to with the per-pin monitoring is only present on the Astral. Also, if you don't install their software, this isn't going to protect your card. Wait, why is the calculator up? Anyway, let's get the calculator out of the way. You can tell I was in a rush to record this, because, yeah, like, I just watched this and I was just like, man, what is it with, like, giant tech YouTubers being completely incapable of just measuring things? You have multimeters. You recently made a video about a like, ridiculously expensive oscilloscope that you're using for testing power supplies. Like... You have measuring equipment. Just buy a card, measure it. How hard is that? But anyway, so yeah, ASUS on the Astral cards implementation, this doesn't do anything unless you install the software, because NVIDIA wouldn't give an ASUS permission to implement some kind of like fail-safe mode onto the card, where if the card detects that, hey, one of these connectors is super overloaded, like, I don't know, they could have put a speaker on it to, like, scream at you, or just automatically shut down, or, like, something. Yeah, you don't get anything. The only way you're going to know if an Astral is overloaded on one of the pins is if you have the software installed and you can see that the software will give you a warning. Which, like, that's still better than nothing. But yeah, it's not going to necessarily prevent the connector from melting. In fact, I saw I think a 5080 Astral where somebody managed to plug in the connector badly. I'm assuming they plugged it in badly. It could have been a worn out connector. Like, this connector just sucks. Like, it keeps melting. It doesn't really matter. Like, if you design a connector where there's a high probability that somebody's going to manage to plug it in so wrong that it melts, your connector is garbage. But anyway, so I actually saw a melted Astral ASUS card. I think it was a 5080. And the reason that melted is because the person who had the card didn't install the software, so they didn't know that most of the power the card was pulling was going through one wire. And that wire ended up melting. I mean, not the wire, but like the pin ended up melting. Doesn't really matter. So yeah, so this is not like you do need the software. Which is not great, as far as I'm concerned. And then, of course, if you look at something like the ASUS 5090 Tough, well, that doesn't do that at all. This is wired exactly the same as a 5090 Founders Edition, which, again, LTT would know if they just freaking measured things for once, instead of sending emails to clueless PR representatives. But anyway, yeah, if you look at this, I mean, actually from the back we can't really see anything, but you can see how ASUS is putting a thermal pad on the connector to like desperately, like anything to keep this stupid thing from melting because, you know, designing proper power connectors is just no longer an option. But anyway, the issue with all of the 5090s is like you'll see you have these two shunt resistors here. These are in parallel. Okay? This side of these two shunt resistors is tied together. If you take a multimeter to this, and actually you'd probably have to desolder them unless you have like a 4-wire multimeter, because you're not measuring 2 milliohm shunt resistors, especially not in parallel. But anyway, but even then, it's like LTT like butchered a 5090, so it's like, you know, what's the harm in like buying one of these, desoldering the shunts? Like you can desolder shunts with just a soldering iron and some preheating, and it's not going to make a mess as long as you're not completely clueless, though we are talking about LTT here, so I don't know, maybe they'd manage to fail at desoldering a shunt resistor as well, but the thing is, you could just measure that these two are actually connected to the exact same 12-volt polygon on the input side. And that 12-volt polygon goes to all 6 of the 12-volt pins on this card. It's wired exactly the same as the 5090. It just doesn't look the same because of, like, the Founders Edition, because the Founders Edition has the silly angled connector, so it's, like, really obvious that everything is tied together because, yeah, you got this... like that's just how this connector is visually looks, but like electrically speaking, all of the 5090s are wired the same way except the ASUS Astral. And the reason they're all wired this way, and even all the 9070 XTs that use the 12-volt high failure rate, they're also wired this way, is because the actual PCI spec literally requires that all of your pins are tied together, which is another thing that LTT could have done. They could have just bought a PCI SIG spec document and just check that as for how that connector is supposed to be implemented. But anyway, so if you look at this MSI 5090, right, this is an MSI PCB, you can see that like this shunt is soldered to this top polygon here, right? This shunt is soldered to the exact same polygon. And that polygon, as you can see, does not have an interruption along here, right? Like, whatever this is connected to is the same thing that this is connected to. So that statement from MSI about, like, oh no, our card doesn't have all 6 of the pins tied into the same 12-volt polygon, that is a lie. Or, like, that is just a straight-up lie. They are all tied together into the one polygon. And the thing is, I'm actually going to quote the PCI SIG documentation on how you're supposed to wire this stupid power connector. And the way you're supposed to wire it is all six header power and ground pins must be joined to the same PCB plane within the connector pin field on the add-in card, which technically means that the ASUS Astral is actually in violation of the PCI SIG spec because it doesn't do that. Right? Because what ASUS is doing, if you look at it, it's pretty obvious. You can see how, like, so the spec basically calls that these 6 pins are immediately tied together. Like, as soon as they hit the board, these should all join into one polygon. You can very clearly see that ASUS is in violation of this, because in order to get per pin current monitoring, you need to split the pins out, so that you can run them through some shunt resistors, right? So this pin is wired to this shunt resistor. That pin is wired to this shunt resistor. This pin is wired to this shunt resistor. That shunt resistor. You get the idea, right? Every single one of these is wired to an individual shunt resistor, which is how ASUS can give you that software monitoring capability so that, you know, as long as you're near the computer, you can prevent the card from melting. But on the MSI GPU, but on the TAF, that isn't a thing. These 2 shunt resistors are connected to the exact same polygon. And actually, if you look at the 5090 Astral, you'll notice that we have those 2 same shunts right over there, right? But they're after the, like, big fat polygon over here. So we get this big fat polygon, and then we get the NVIDIA shunts, which is what this is. And then we get the final 12-volt distribution into the card. So, yeah, like, I am incredibly annoyed. Like ASUS, the statement they got from ASUS is technically not a lie. Okay, like ASUS, what they're saying here, yes, the Astral can monitor per pin current. It'll warn you if you have the software installed. also if you're actually physically present near the computer, right? Because if you're using a 5090 for like rendering work and you leave it running overnight, you might wake up in the morning to find that your connector has melted. Monitoring software or not. I guess you could technically maybe set the monitoring software to trigger some kind of well, I don't know how convenient that would be to do. But anyway, so yeah, so ASUS, the ASUS statement is fine, but the MSI one, where is it? Where's the MSI one? Yeah. Oh, screw it. The MSI one is just wrong. Okay, like unless you have a Astral card from ASUS, the Founders Edition, the MSI Supreme X, the MSI whatever, the palette cards, everything, they're all wired the same way because the PCI SIG spec requires that you combine all of the 12-volt pins as soon as it hits the board. And so if some of the if some of the pins, and here you can actually also really see it, right? Like you can see how we just, like, the connector's over here, and then all of the 12-volt power gets moved over here, and then it flows through these two shunt resistors. The 5090 Founders Edition doesn't have two shunt resistors, right? Like, so this is two 2 milliohm shunt resistors. These are in parallel. This is functionally the same as having one 1 milliohm shunt resistor. What does the Founders Edition do? It has the one milliohm shunt resistor, right? So my point with this video is that every 5090, with the exception of the Astral, is wired the same way that the Founders Edition is. Now, the Founders Edition might be more prone to melting because their power connector is right next to a bunch of voltage regulators and memory chips and just, the hot end of the GPU, though I'm not even sure that this is necessarily more prone to melting, but, like, yeah, it doesn't really help if your connector is on a super dense, high power output board, and if that board is at an elevated temperature, well, your power connector has less margin to get hot before it melts. But, I don't actually think that that's the main issue. I think that this connector is just stupid. And it should just not be wired this way. Like, the 3090 Ti wired it in a way that actually, like, mostly solved this. Which is why you don't hear about 3090 Ti's melting as much as you hear about everything else. Also, like 3090s, like the Founders Edition 3090s and 3080s, right? Those also use that connector. And admittedly, they don't usually run that much power, but they're also wired differently. Anyway, so yeah, I'm just so annoyed with this video because this is ridiculous. Like, how can, like, just measure it? Why would you send an email to a clueless PR person? What do you have a lab for? So, anyway, that's it for this video. It's just like, LTT is now spreading MSI misinformation. There we go, I got it. This is just false. This is just completely false. This is true of like 30 series GPUs. Everything like 40 series and up, they're always combined. All of the pins go into a single pad on the PCB because that is required by the PCI SIG spec. The only exception is the ASUS Astral, which is technically in violation of the spec. But I approve of what ASUS is doing because I think the spec is stupid, and the fact that the connector just keeps melting, in my opinion, is undeniable of evidence that the spec is stupid. Because if the spec wasn't stupid, the connector wouldn't melt all the damn time. Anyway, there. That's actually it for the video. So, yeah. I don't know. I think, like, I don't know if LTT, I guess they could just cut this section out of the video or something. I don't know. I don't know what, like, I'm not, I don't edit my videos ever, so. Actually, no, that's not true. I've occasionally used the blur tool that you get in YouTube Studio for stuff, but, yeah, this is just wrong. They should just, like, post a comment or something, because this is just wrong. Like, every single 5090, with the exception of the Astral, combines the 12-volt pins as soon as they hit the board, and this MSI per emailer, like, at best, clueless, at worst, a liar. So, yeah, thanks for watching. If you'd like to support my channel, there are links in the description you could check out. That would be very much appreciated. And, yeah, that's it for the video. So, goodbye.